Marcia Hirschberg, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Westwood, Walpole, and Dedham. Yes, you got that right. We represent 3 different towns. Membership in our group is open to all men and women 16 years and older. So if you've got a youngster at home or a grandchild that's into some of our issues, please invite them to join us. It's much less expensive if you're a student. So, yeah, it's 0, she said? Ah, our treasurer says 0. So that is great. This year, the League of Women Voters has decided, because we've been told we don't have many years left, that we're going to try to focus on the environment. With that in mind, next week, Thursday evening, our annual meeting will be hosting the speaker from Senator Markey's office, who will talk about the Green New Deal. Now, because this is at my house, the dinner, we would like to know if you're coming. We need a head count. So as you leave, go back and check your name on the sign-in sheet so we can be in touch. I also want to say that next Wednesday in Dedham, these are great times, there will be a town hall also focusing on the Green New Deal, and that's going to have a lot of the young people from our community heading it up. So we've got, yes, a lot of work to do, but we're going to do it, okay? Our presenter this evening is Claire Galkowski. Now, I just think of her as my lead colleague, but I'll share some information about her. Since 1998, Claire has been the executive director of the 15-town South Shore Recycling Cooperative. Prior to that, she worked as a microbiologist running a teaching lab at MIT. This was news to me. Parenthood sparked her concern about unsustainable waste practices. Her networking and volunteer work prepared her for the current position she holds. She served on the board of Mass Recycle for 10 years and then as president for 2 of them. Claire is active on the Mass Product Stewardship Council, the Westwood Environmental Action Committee, and the Green Congregation Committee in First Parish Needham, and she's a very active member of the League of Women Voters. Thank you. Oh, forgot. It's a lengthy presentation. So Claire would like to ask you, if you have a question, so you don't forget, if you're my age, write it down on a card, and she will be handling them at the end of the presentation, and she will be taking live questions. But I hope you'll, yes, Sam?
What cards?
Cards. We'll be passing them out.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So please do that. You know, if something hits you, sparks your attention, please write it down, and we will take them up after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this. As Marcia mentioned, I have been a proud member of the League for many years. I'd also like to thank the Westwood media for filming this, especially after graduation day yesterday. I'm sure they've been very busy. Was anyone here at graduation at Westwood High School? Oh, thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'd also like to thank the library. They've been very helpful getting set up here. So thank you all for coming tonight. Welcome, welcome. I'm so impressed that people would come out in this busy time of year to hear about trash. I'd like to give a little shout out to the Westwood Environmental Action Committee, which Marcia mentioned I am on. Has anyone heard about community electricity aggregation? Yay. Yes, we passed that at town meeting, so come next year, Westwood residents should have an opportunity to purchase cleaner, greener electricity at a low cost. We've also been running Bring Your Own Bag Month this past May. Is anyone aware of that? Oh, good. We have some leftover stickers over on the table from that. So WEAC's been very busy too. As Marcia mentioned, I used to be a lab microbiologist. I was kind of vamping. I didn't really know what I wanted to do until one day I was pushing my 2-year-old daughter up the Center Street in West Roxbury past the library. And this was on Earth Day. There was a booth and they were handing out magazines. It was called Earth Day 1990 Action Guide. I don't have it with me, but this publication changed my life, literally. I started flipping through the pages. It had graphics and graphs and cartoons and facts and figures about how all of our collective habits were impacting our Earth. When one of us turns on the water, it doesn't seem to make much difference, but when 350 million of us do it, it has a huge impact. It went through water, it went through gasoline, transportation, but the part that really grabbed me was the part about material consumption. For some reason, I really connected with that, and it got me thinking, what is going to be left for my daughter, who was at the time 2? By the time she is my age, I've got to do something so that there's something left for her. Here's a group of Black Friday performance artists. I would like to think of them as good-humored waste haters. I myself am a lifelong waste hater, which is probably why I was drawn to the material consumption part of environmental stuff. My 4th grade teacher, Sister Rosanina, told me I must be Scottish because I would squeeze the last sentence of an essay into the margin rather than starting a new page. I hear some laughing. Does anyone else relate to that kind of behavior? Oh, nobody wants to admit to being a waste hater. Well, I'm sure there's a few of you out there. And tonight, I'm going to validate that compulsion if you share it with me. And if you don't, then I hope that you will join the club by the end of our talk. We have a whole lot of crises going on in the world right now. Chief among them is the climate crisis, which has been elevated to an emergency. I'm sure many of you have heard about the various reports that are coming out telling us that our global carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions are really changing our weather patterns and our climate. So that's probably the most urgent crisis we have. We also have a recycling crisis, which I will talk about tonight, where a lot of our recycling just doesn't have any place to go. But one thing that's driving both of these crises is what I call the consumption crisis. We just buy and use and throw away too much stuff. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how our consumption of just everyday products impacts the Earth's ability to sustain 7 billion human beings. We're going to focus on paper, and I'll show you why. Then we're going to talk about how recycling works and how we can make it work better. Finally, I hope to inspire you with some more powerful tools than recycling to help keep our small planet able to support us. I will be providing toolkits, you might call them prizes at the end, to help you on your way to a waste-free life. I would like to point out a disclaimer before I start. To avoid saying about and approximately many, many times, anytime you see a number up there, for the most part, consider it a very broad number. The point of it is the order of magnitude more than the actual number, because there's a lot of variability in a lot of the numbers that I'll be talking about. So with that, I am going to read you a little ditty I wrote. Gotta push the right button. There's more to our stuff than meets the eye. It doesn't just fall to us out of the sky. It takes lots of rocks to make that jewel. And that's not all. Lots of energy, too. And it's that energy that I want you to focus on the most as we talk tonight. Everything we consume, from clothing to cars to coffee, has an upstream environmental footprint. It's on the order of 10 to 1,000 times by weight of what the actual product is. For instance, a pound of coffee might have an upstream impact of 100 pounds. I don't know the exact number there, but how can that be, you might say? Most of it is in air emissions from the energy that it required to make it. It goes up into the atmosphere. We don't see it, but believe me, it's there, and it is showing us. There's also a lot of pollution associated with it, and you have to mine a large amount of stuff and purify it to get down to a finished consumer product. Just like trash, we don't see these impacts. We don't see where our trash goes. We just want it to go away. But even more than that, we don't see what happened before things reach their store shelves. Just make sure I'm on the right. Okay. When I was born, the average American disposed of less than 1,000 pounds of trash per year. That's a lot, but it's not as much as we dispose of now. Just think of it, 1,000 pounds per year. By 1990, we were generating over 1,600 pounds on average per person per year. That's every American. There's 350 million of us. The good news is that over the past several years, that number has kind of flattened out, partially due to lightweighting of products and digital media, technological advances. Those have helped us to at least even out our personal disposal. However, the population is growing, and with that, we still have a growing amount of trash that's going to waste. And I should point out that the amount that is listed in this chart here doesn't include things that go down the drain like toilet paper. This is just what we throw in the trash or put in our recycling bins. But even more than that, these numbers don't take into account the upstream waste that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So before we talk about recycling, we are going to swim upstream and see what goes into producing some of that 1,620 pounds per person per year that we dispose. Making consumer products requires a massive amount of power to manufacture and transport the products. Most of this power comes from fossil fuels. Here's a picture of an oil field in California, and those are some lovely oil rigs right off the coast of Santa Barbara. And with a surfer walking by, I was used to seeing them. But, they're there, and they're always a potential risk, as we learned with the oil spills that have happened over the years. It takes many dirty steps to make our consumer products. Here's a picture of a nickel mine right up in Labrador. In the pristine wilderness of Labrador, there's this industrial complex that mines and purifies nickel that goes into so many of our products. This is a picture of the result of a burst retention pool in Hungary. This happened about 10 or 12 years ago. It was near a bauxite refining factory where they purify aluminum. There was a retention pond with toxic sludge in it because it takes a lot of terrible chemicals to purify aluminum. This thing let go and let loose millions of gallons of toxic sludge. It killed 8 people. And this is part of the hidden footprint that we don't see when we buy products off the shelf. These are what we call life cycle externalities, and they're not figured into the actual cost of our products. So what we're paying for doesn't cover the cost of using the atmosphere as a sewer and polluting the water and this kind of accident. I mentioned that our consumer habits help to fuel climate change. This shows how a different way of looking at how we cut up the carbon dioxide pie, if you will. We usually think of driving our cars and heating our homes and using electricity as the main things that cause emission of carbon dioxide. But when the EPA several years ago looked at it from a different angle, they looked at the life cycle analysis of how products were made, and it turns out that 42% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the United States can be attributed to our use and disposal of consumer products. So our cars make a big difference, our travel habits, our homes, but our consumption is a much bigger contributor than we generally tend to think, because most of the emissions happen somewhere else. So next I'm going to go into a little bit of chemistry. So here's a trigger warning. If you're a chemophobe, shut your eyes. But I'm going to try to very simply show you how we can get so much carbon dioxide from producing our consumer products. The basic chemistry of combustion. So 1 gallon of oil weighs about 7 pounds. When it's burned, it produces about 21 pounds of carbon dioxide. That is because the basic unit of oil or fuel is 1 carbon atom with 4 hydrogens around it. That's a methane molecule. Now, hydrogen only is a very tiny molecule. It has a molecular weight of 1. So 1,000, or a mole, which is a finite number of molecules, of hydrogen weighs 1 gram. Is that right, Pete? Okay. Now, oxygen, on the other hand, is a much bigger molecule, and a mole, which is a finite number of molecules, of atoms, weighs 16 pounds. So oxygen is a heavier atom. And when it's burned, this methane switches out its 4 hydrogen atoms for 2 oxygen atoms. So this is the formula. So methane plus 2 oxygens combine, and they become a carbon dioxide molecule and 2 waters, plus a lot of heat. It's a very efficient way to make heat. So a methane molecule weighs 16 grams per mole. A carbon dioxide molecule weighs 48 grams per mole. I hope nobody's head's exploding right now. My husband, Jan, who's right over there, you want to raise your hand? He's going to be running a course called Climate Science for Climate Activists. So if you want to learn more about this stuff, you should talk to him after the presentation, because I don't want to get too deeply into this. But so we've transformed this oil into 2 atmospheric gases that we basically don't see. What happens to them? So the carbon dioxide goes up into the atmosphere, and it stays there because it's a very stable molecule for thousands and thousands of years. Once it's up there, it's hard to get it out. Not much happens to it. It also goes into the ocean. So if you're concerned about the health of the oceans, which there's been a lot of talk about ocean pollution, which is a thing, but the bigger source of pollution to the oceans right now is carbon dioxide, because when it combines with the water, it reduces the pH, which means it becomes acidic. It goes into equilibrium between CO2 and H2O and carbonic acid. As the ocean acidifies, it makes it more difficult for certain types of life, particularly shellfish and corals, to live. The other product is the heat. Where does the heat go? Well, the heat goes into the atmosphere, where a lot of it is now trapped, but a lot of it also goes into the oceans, which is why the oceans are warming, which is causing changes in migration patterns of fish. It's changing the way our fishermen can earn a living because their fish are going in different places. It's changing the way animals that depend on fish survive, because if the fish aren't coming anymore, then there's nothing for other species to eat. This is a habitat disruption. So, and this is all a product of our products as well as other habits that humans have for increasing the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Okay, I'm going to give a minute for that to soak in. All right, nobody's head's exploded yet. I'm glad. So what are we consuming that's causing all this greenhouse gas stuff and all this other pollution? Chart. This is another EPA chart where they analyzed all of the disposed materials in the waste stream nationwide. And it turns out that the largest single type of item is paper. We use paper as if it is air, practically. We're very cavalier with it. And it is clogging up our landfills, and it's even having a problem now with our recycling streams. There's just an awful lot of it. There's about twice as much paper in our waste stream as there is plastic. Food waste is another big problem, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. That's a whole other topic unto itself. But paper being the biggest led me to do a lot more research into what goes into it. Here's another way of looking at the paper. Previous slide showed both disposal and recycling. So those are combined tonnages for everything. Our trash in Westwood, and I'm not sure about other towns, but they probably all go to a facility in Millbury called Wheelabrator, which is a waste-to-energy facility. It burns our trash, it transforms it into electricity and ash and air emissions, and they do recover some metal. So they are required every 3 years to do a waste audit, a detailed waste composition study. And the information we get from these is just fascinating. At least I find it fascinating. And for one thing, it does show that the largest single item that we are disposing of in the trash is paper still, followed by food and plastics. So this is, I thought this was a very interesting slide. So that just further informed my decision to do a deeper dive on paper, because that's the big one. All right. The average American consumes about 500 pounds of paper every year. That's more than 3 me's, almost 4, not quite. That's a lot of paper for every American on average to use, and that includes residential paper and stuff we consume at school and at work. Some of it's unavoidable, go to the right one, but a lot of it is under our control. There's a perception that paper is natural and biodegradable. I used to think so myself. You know, I didn't like plastic things. It's a perception that seems to be pretty widespread. All the plastic bag bans target the plastic, but they don't target the paper, because people think the paper is nice. I hope that after tonight you will have a greater respect for the paper that we use. So, but the manufacturing process to make paper is really an affront to nature. And when we burn it, it turns into carbon dioxide. If we landfill it and it gets wet and breaks down, it generates methane, which is an even more powerful greenhouse gas. Even recycling has its consequences, because recycling requires energy also. So how do we make this 500 pounds of paper? Well, you start with 4 mature trees. Think about 4 beautiful trees in your backyard, getting cut down just so you can have your paper for the year, and I can have my paper for the year. Clear cutting is the norm. But it's not always done that way. Some places do selective cutting, but they still have to bring heavy equipment into the woods, so it does trample down the other parts of the ecosystem. And they have to treat it with herbicides, because they're going to want to grow more trees there, but they want to harvest those trees to make new paper, so they don't want anything else growing around it to compete for the nutrients. Now then if they plant a tree farm, it's a monoculture. It's not an ecosystem or a forest, it's just trees. And trees are better than no trees for sure, but they're not a forest. And our lives literally depend on healthy forests, oceans, and rivers. But the forests provide healthy habitat for many, many species. They purify the air and the water. They moderate temperatures. And you remember the chemistry slide? They do the reverse. They convert the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to structural wood. But this happens much more efficiently in a mature forest than in small trees. So destroying forests is not in our best interests. And then there is the paper making process. Oh, how did that one come up first? So after they cut down the trees, they bring it to a paper mill where they have to turn logs into paper. That takes a lot of work in the form of energy and chemicals. So first what they have to do is they have to debark the trees, they have to chop them up into little pieces, and then they have to boil them in lye and sodium sulfide, which are both very dangerous chemicals, because they have to separate the lignin from the cellulose. The lignin is the glue that binds the tree together. So you have to free the cellulose in order to be able to make the paper from it. If the paper is going to be white, they also have to bleach it. So there are a lot of chemicals involved with making paper, and the pollutants go up into the air. Has anybody ever driven by a paper mill? Yeah. What's your main impression of it?
Smells.
It smells, and what you're smelling is ammonia and sulfides and volatile organic compounds. People who live near paper mills have a high incidence of lung disease because of this. It's very unhealthy. And it also pollutes the water. After the pulp is freed from the lignin, from the wood, they spread it onto these big screens. And you can see the scale of how big these things are. See how big that guy is? That roll of paper there weighs several tons. They have to squeeze the water out of it, though. First they do it physically, and they use heat, which is another requirement for using energy and energy, generally from fossil fuels. They also have to treat it with chemicals, because they have to make it lay flat. If it's going to become a magazine or some other white paper, there are all different things that they have to add to it to make the specific kind of paper that is being called for. And then they roll it up and they have to ship it. So the journey still hasn't ended. It still has several other stops to go before it lands on your store shelf, depending on what it's going to be made into. And every step of transportation requires, guess what? Trucks that emit CO2. That's right. So that's part of the carbon footprint as well. And after it gets there, you know the rest of the story. You go to the store, you buy it, you bring it home, you probably use it once, you throw it away. And what happens? If it goes in the landfill, you get the methane. If it goes to the waste to energy, you get the CO2. So enough about manufacturing. So does anyone think that paper is a lovely natural product still? Oh, okay. I haven't persuaded everybody. The Chinese parchment, yes, there probably are better ways to make paper, better things to make it out of, such as hemp. But by and large, our paper comes from trees or other paper. But we talked about the danger. Now we're going to talk about the opportunities that the consumption crisis presents for us. The good news is that we can use our power as consumers to reduce our impacts on the environment. We can be smart recyclers and we can reduce our consumption. So now we're going to review the waste consumption, the hierarchy, I should say, of more sustainable consumption. So you've probably seen this before. You've heard of the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. And nothing has changed there. We've just added a few little extra things. Reduce, rethink, refuse. Reuse, repair, repurpose. And the bottom of the list is recycle, rot, and recover, because those are the least effective ways to reduce our environmental footprint. So we're going to start though with the 3rd R, because I know that most of you are really interested in learning about recycling. And recycling is a kind of complicated thing. It makes us feel good though, to feel like, you know, the stuff that we're using, it's okay. We're going to be able to recycle it, so it's not going to go to waste. So we're going to talk about how recycling works and how we can make it work better. Now, once we're done with something, we're faced with a question: what should I do with it now? Some people, and I doubt very much that any of you who've bothered to come here tonight would do this, but you just throw it in the most convenient receptacle around, or even on the ground. I know, I pick up a lot of litter off the ground, so does Dan here. And I'm sure there's a few other litter pickers. Any other plotters here? Oh, right. Oh, yeah, you said you weren't waste haters, come on. So I'm sure this is a thoughtful group. But even those of us who have good intentions, myself included, can be tempted to do what we now call wish cycling. Yep, it's a real word now. I bet it'll be in the dictionary next year. And we think, well, it seems like it should be recyclable. I'm going to throw it in, see what they can figure it out down at the plant. Well, I want to tell you today that this does more harm than good, and this is why. Recycling, the point of recycling is to create feedstock for new products. Recycling is a business, and it needs to create materials that can be put back into a production stream and made into new products. It has to have value in order to work. Recyclables are commodities, and their value fluctuates according to a lot of external factors, such as the economy, the price of oil, tariffs, which are really having an impact on our recycling markets right now, the strength of the dollar, and basically supply and demand. It only works if manufacturers can reuse the materials that we generate instead of virgin materials. This is my friend Ben Harvey. He owns E.L. Harvey & Sons Recyclers out in Westboro. They operate a single-stream recycling facility as well as a few other things. And this is about 1.5 years ago. We call these stranded assets. These are huge bales of paper that are piled up in his parking lot because he can't sell them. Now, I mentioned briefly our recycling crisis. For 20 years, Chinese businesses were buying up our recycling like they were going out of style. Because we were buying so much stuff from them, they needed materials to make that stuff from. So we would collect the recyclables and put it on a ship going back to China, which would have been empty, because we buy more stuff from them than they buy from us. And they were paying top dollar for it, because they really needed the stuff. You might remember when we used to do dual stream recycling. We used to put the paper and cardboard in one container, the bottles and cans in the other container, and they'd get picked up separately. Well, the Chinese weren't being very picky, Chinese businesses, I should say, so they would buy and material that might not have had the highest quality, but they needed to pull the stuff out that they needed to use. And they would pay more and more. They ended up putting a lot of local businesses out of business. We used to have a bunch of paper mills right here in Massachusetts. We had Natick Paperboard, a place in Hyde Park. There was the Newark Mill up in Lawrence, another one in Fitchburg. There were several paper mills that used recycled paper from locally. And they couldn't compete with the Chinese because they were being underbid, I guess that was. By 2017, about 30% of our curbside recyclables were going to China. We were selling them to China. And the government discovered that a lot of the stuff that was coming in had increasing amounts of non-recyclable material in it. There was, food waste. You can imagine after a few months what food waste is going to do to the rest of the load. Diapers, just a lot of stuff that didn't belong in the bales. The bales had been dirtier and dirtier over the years. And the Chinese government, to the chagrin of many of the businesses, said, all right, we don't have the capacity to deal with your trash anymore. We're ending up throwing a lot of the stuff that we're importing in our own landfills, and that's not sustainable. They basically declared an embargo on our mixed recyclables. So this happened about a year and a half ago, and the bottom dropped out of the market. It caused a worldwide flood. It didn't just affect the United States, it affected the entire world, because the entire world was sending their stuff largely to China. So values of the materials fell off a cliff. The stuff, they just couldn't move the stuff, all our recyclables. So in order to fix this problem, we had to clean up our mess, and we're still working on that now. Mass DEP has worked hard with the local processors to help educate all of you guys and me about what goes in and what doesn't, and stop the wish cycling. We've gotten some really bad habits. Single stream recycling has not helped. It's much more efficient for waste management or whatever company to pick up a single cart at the curb and sort it out at their plant than to pick it up in two different streams, and that's why we ended up with single stream. Problem is, we call it single stream, we get a big giant cart, and people think, oh, I can put anything in there now, I can, it might be recyclable. So the contamination has crept up and up and up, and now it's generally in the United States around 25% of the stuff that's going into the recycling streams, the single stream, is not recycled. And it's very hard to sort things out when there's that much contamination in it. So, is there anyone here that goes to a transfer station and sorts it out? Anyone from Dover or Medfield? Okay. There are some towns that sort it at the transfer station, and that presents a much cleaner product. But the single stream stuff has generally gone really downhill in quality over the past several years. Why aren't you moving? Okay, I guess I'll just have to wing it. So the organization I work for, South Shore Recycling Cooperative, got a grant from DEP to hire recycling education and compliance officers. Well, they were going to our transfer stations and flipping lids on the curb to try to provide feedback to the residents about what can and cannot go into the recycling. You can see Julie here pulling a piece of styrofoam out of that bin. So if there was too much stuff in there, she put a tag on the cart, she'd turn the cart around, and the waste hauler wouldn't pick it up. There's Dory at the Situate transfer station. She was talking to residents as they approached the pit, and she thought they were going to throw a plastic bag or something in. She'd be like, wait a minute, give them a little card and explain to them why it wouldn't work. All right, that's not going to work. DEP also has come up with a program called Recycle Smart Mass. It's an excellent resource for all of us. And what they did is they got together with all the material recovery facilities, which is the places where our trash, our recycling goes. Oops, Freudian slip there. And ask them, what are the items that you can sell, and what are the items that are causing the most problem in your recycling stream? So they talked to the 7 biggest sorting facilities in the state, and they came up with this list. And if you remember what dual stream recycling looked like, you will see a strange resemblance. It is the same stuff, and actually, it never should have changed. We never should have been taking anything that wasn't acceptable in the dual stream. It's paper, cardboard, bottles, and containers, rigid containers. The items that are causing the worst problems, plastic bags is the number one complaint from all of the MRFs, and you'll see why. I've got a video coming up, so you'll have a relief from my droning in a few minutes. So if people put their recycling in a plastic bag, they're not going to open it. It goes straight in the trash, because sometimes when they open it, they find diapers, hypodermic needles, trash, dog poop. It's just amazing. So they're not going to open any bagged recyclables. The loose plastic bags get jammed up in the equipment, and they have to stop the equipment and cut them all out. They prevent the other materials from being sorted properly, and they get into the paper and the cardboard. Tanglers and clothing were the next item that were identified. Things like holiday lights, chains, anything that can get tangled up. Think about your vacuum cleaner. If you run over a shoelace or something, it's kind of like that. So those were the things that they present logistical problems and safety issues for the workers that work at these facilities. Oh, it's working now. So what has changed over the past 20 years is the level of tolerance for off-spec stuff. And so now we have to get back to basics. Other things that have contributed to the confusion is we have a lot of new different kinds of packaging materials, and those little chasing arrow symbols that make you think, oh, this is recyclable because there's this recycling symbol on it. Well, I'm going to show you that that's not necessarily the case. So next I'm going to show you how the process works. In a circular economy, everything keeps going round and round instead of one-way street like we're on basically now, where you manufacture it, you use it, and you throw it away. But we're going to start at the top with us as consumers. We throw away our trash, or we put our recycling in the recycling bin. It has to get carted, trucked, chugga, to the sorting facility. In our case, it's Waste Management in Avon. And at the facility, they have a lot of equipment, and they have to unscramble the egg of all these different kinds of materials. So they load it all up onto a conveyor belt, they blow off the paper, they shake out the glass, because a lot of times, usually the glass will break in the process. So they have these little 2-inch screens. So everything that's smaller than 2 inches will fall through the screen and end up with the glass. They have magnets, eddy currents to push off the aluminum. They have optical sorters for the plastics, because there's a lot of different kinds of plastic. And it's a very noisy place. They need to sort all these different things into the cardboard only, paper only, aluminum cans only, steel cans, and different grades of plastics. It involves a lot of heavy equipment, which not only is loud, but it requires a lot of energy. There's a new facility coming online in Rochester. It's called Zero Waste Solutions, and it's a huge place. They're covering their whole roof with solar panels. It's only going to be enough to provide about 1/3 of their power. The rest of their power, they still need to get off the grid. So that just gives you an idea of how much energy it takes to sort these things up and bale them. After they get sorted into their components, they get put into this baler, which squishes it. It's got this huge ramjet, and it squishes the material into a big giant cube. And then they wrap it up in strapping. They have to put it on a truck and find somebody to buy it. So, if it's plastic, the plastic has to be sorted into the different resin types, so it can be made into new plastic. The biggest no-nos, as we mentioned, are plastic bags. Here's something that I see a lot. Does anybody drink bottled? No, I'm not going to ask. Bottled water often comes in cardboard, which is very valuable. Well, it can be very valuable. It isn't right at this moment. Wrapped up in this shrink wrap. And if you put it into the recycling like that, there's nothing they can do with it because the two components have to be separated from each other. They can't make plastic out of paper and they can't make paper out of plastic. So they can't take mixed materials. Everything has to be in its single use. Food, as I mentioned, especially in the hot weather, if there's food or liquid in the mix, it's going to get all over everything. It's going to stick everything together, make it really hard to separate. If it's really cold out, it'll freeze. If it's hot out, it will stink. And I don't know if you've ever been to a landfill or any kind of a waste facility. They always have a slight odor to them, but if you go in the summertime, oh, it's bad. And if you have to ship these products any distance, then it just gets worse and worse and worse. Tanglers. I've seen a lot of coat hangers in local recycling bins. This is an example of wish cycling, and this can actually create a dangerous work situation for the people who have to sort these things out. You know how hard it is to sort out your own coat hangers when you got more than 2 or 3 of them all tangled up together. And finally, I hate to tell you, but cartons are coated with plastic, and unless they go to a special plant and are baled separately, they can't be recycled because the paper component can't be pulled apart from the plastic component. And this is true for actually a lot of things. Coffee cups have plastic embedded in the paper to hold the liquid. So any paper product that holds liquid generally can't be recycled. Yes, it worked. That woke you up. So here are the basic rules. Recycling 101. And we're going to have a quiz in a minute. And then we're going to see a film. Or it might be the other way around, I'm not sure. First, you have to have loose, single, and separable materials because the plant has to be able to sort it out into single individual components in order for it to be able to be made into a new product. Size matters. I mentioned that they have little screens. If it's something that's really small, like a pill bottle or a bottle cap, it's probably going to end up in the glass. So put it in the trash, please. Or don't use it, even better. Generally, if it's two-dimensional, it's going to end up in the paper or the cardboard because two-dimensional and three-dimensional determine which direction in the plant it's going to go. Three-dimensional, bottles, cans, and containers. So a flattened beverage container is likely to end up in the paper. The items need to be clean and dry because they have to make new products out of them, and you don't want them to be sticking together. Finally, plastic. The most confusing item there is because there are so many different kinds of it. The only kinds of plastic that our material recovery facility can actually sell is number 1, number 2, and number 5 rigid plastic containers. And we're going to do a little quiz on this to help you absorb that because I know that's the most frequently asked question I get. Can I recycle this kind of plastic? Now before I go to the video, I want to shout out a few resources that you might find helpful. If you're in Westwood, the town has subscribed to a service called Recycle Coach, and you can download the app on your iPhone. I suggest that you look for it right now, because it's a really great resource. You can, if you have an item that you're not sure of, like an egg carton, You just type it in and it'll tell you whether you can put it in the recycling or if you should put it in the trash. It might even tell you some alternative place for it. If you're in another town, they might have Reminder or Recollect. Those are similar types of apps. And they also tell you remind you what day your pickup is, when your hazardous waste day is happening, things like that. They're really very helpful. If you don't have those, the state has a RecycleSmartMA.org has a thing called Recyclopedia. And again, it's a searchable database. You can just type in your material and you can find out what to do with it. So now I'm going to give you a little break from listening to me, and you're going to be taken on a tour of the waste management recycling facility by my friend Rosemary Nolan, who works in Braintree. If I can get this thing to go.
To the Waste Management Recycle America plant in Avon, Massachusetts. At the plant, these items are also weighed. After weigh-in, the materials are unloaded. Can you see the different types of recyclables in this truckload? There's paper, metal, plastic, glass, and cardboard. The recyclables are pushed onto a conveyor belt where the different types of items are separated. Notice the larger and lighter items like cardboard and newspaper are coming over the belt, while the smaller ones drop down below. At this point in the process, the paper and cardboard are separated out, and everything else goes to the catch bin below to be processed later. As the paper moves down the belt, people manually remove any leftover glass, plastic, or metal that got through the first sort. You probably noticed that there are a lot of people working at this plant. Recycling creates jobs while making the best use of our natural resources. Finally, the paper is baled and shipped to a factory or other plant to be recycled into new paper products. Uh-oh! Here we see why plastic bags of any type do not belong in recycling containers. Notice all the plastic bags jammed in the workings of this machine. When a jam like this occurs, the line shuts down so the machine can be repaired. So please bring your plastic bags from any store or any type to a supermarket. At the entrance of the supermarket, you will find collection containers that accept only plastic bags, and they are recycled separately. With the machine serviced, we can continue on. Here you can see the plastics and metals as they pass through a section of machine that contains super-sized magnets. The magnets separate the cans and metals from the plastics. Each type of recyclable is placed in their own bin. Similar to the paper, the metal and plastic are baled and shipped to a factory or other plant to be recycled into new products.
And that is just the first part of the journey. After it leaves the plant, hopefully they can find someone to buy the product, and assuming that they do, we're going to go back to paper. So this is what happens to the paper. They resuspend the paper in a big giant vat of water. And they're able to pull out little things like staples and, you know, those little window envelope things. They can pull that out, and that has to go to the landfill. And if it's the kind of paper that's got plastic embedded in it, that's going to end up going to the trash as well, because it can't be resuspended in this solution. After that, it's pretty much the same process as making virgin paper. The pulp is spread on the screen and dried and treated however it needs to be treated. The water sucked out of it. But there is a 5% loss because during the process of recycling the paper fibers, they're made out of cellulose fibers and they do break. It's kind of like when you put your clothes in the dryer and you get some lint because some of the fibers break down and they come out of the clothes. Well, the same thing happens with the paper. Some of it ends up going out in the wash water. So you do get a little bit of shrinkage, they call it. So recycling avoids the destructive processes of extraction or harvesting, cutting down the trees, purifying the raw materials into the final materials. So it is far better environmentally to recycle things than to buy virgin materials. And this slide here shows the relative impacts. Now, I was assuming there'd be about 60 people here, and I think we're almost there. Assuming that you're all average consumers in the United States, this is the empowering thing. Our collective impacts, if everyone in this room correctly recycled half of your paper and bought it back as recycled paper, we would save 75 tons, we would consume 75 tons of recycled paper. We'd save 1,200 mature trees on 12, that's about what grows on about 12 acres of forest. 26,000 gallons of fuel. And it would prevent the release of about 270 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's a really good reason to recycle rather than dispose of paper. And of course, we need to close the loop by buying recycled products in order to create markets for them, because if they can't sell the paper out of a paper mill, then all that effort's gone to nothing. So that's my talk on recycling. Now we're going to get to the first two R's and show how we can really make a huge impact by not using too much stuff. All right, the first two R's, reduce, which means just don't buy it. And reuse, repair, purpose. Here's an example of reuse. I like to be creative with my gift wrapping. We get all this stuff. Sometimes we get maps and things we don't really want in the mail, calendars. They make great gift wrap. So just to give you an example of the difference between recycling and reducing or reusing. Over 10 years, just like we talked about with the previous slide, over 10 years it would spare both the disposal and the recycling of 75 tons of paper. And it would also save 1,200 mature trees on 12 acres of forest. But instead of 27,000 gallons of oil equivalent, it would prevent the release of the use of 43,000 gallons of fuel. And it would prevent the release of 450 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So it takes about, you save about 60% rather of the energy required to make new paper by recycling it. But you save even more if you just don't use it in the first place. So how can we do that? Well, we need to rethink. That's under the reduce. And I'm sure some of you already do this. And if you do, yay. Do I need so much? I saw a 20-minute TED Talk, and I'm not going to do 20 minutes on TED Talk, about a guy who was showing people how to get in the habit of only using one paper towel when they were out at a public restroom. It involved shaking your hands several times and taking the towel, folding it in half, and then drying your hands with just one paper towel. It was really a pretty funny TED Talk. Another way to reduce, I'm not going to say too much, but go easy. But even more important than that is to reuse. Do I need any tissues or napkins or paper towels? My husband taught me an amazing trick. I've got it. This is a magic trick. handkerchief. Anybody remember these from the old days? Marcia's waving her hand. This is one of the most useful things I have ever seen. I stick one in my pantry drawer, and I make sure I bring it with me when I go out, and then I can use it instead of any paper towels in the restroom for napkins if I'm out. It has so many wonderful uses, and all I have to do is throw it in the washing machine at the end of the week, at the end of the day.
What's it made of?
This one's made out of cotton, honey, but you do have some bamboo ones, and those are good. I think this is a cotton poly blend, and if you use it many times, then it will definitely have a positive impact, or less of a negative impact on the environment. Let's see. Why use only one dish towel when you can use 100 rolls of paper towels? Is this really more convenient than using your washing machine? We have been sold a real bill of goods by the paper industry, who has convinced us that reusing rags and dirt and things are gross and disgusting, and that we should just buy paper towels all the time. Americans use more paper towels than people in any other country in the whole world. Is there anybody here who uses less than 3 rolls of paper towels a year? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We got some good waste-haters here. How about cloth napkins? All right. I know that Marcia uses those because she brought these for me to show. Well, you guys are already part of the club. Industry's done a magnificent job of persuading us that we don't want to use cloth for cleanups. But I use rags for most of my cleanups. I actually think they work better than paper towels, and I have all different kinds of cloth. I have been using this rag for probably 15 or 20 years, and it hasn't killed me yet. I just throw it in the washing machine, even on cold, and it comes back out, nice, ready to use again. We probably have about, what do you think, 30 or so rags that we keep reusing over and over again. They're awesome. We got 3 cats, so we need them. Regarding germs, as I mentioned, I used to be a microbiologist. I used to grow giant vats of E. coli and other organisms, Acinetobacter, and most germs, what we consider germs, are absolutely necessary for our survival. In fact, 3 pounds of our bodies are composed of bacteria, and if we didn't have them, we would be dead. So I say if it's bad for the germs, it's bad for us. There's certainly a few bad actors out there, and we do want to be careful of that. But generally, I think we've gone overboard with trying to just use pure things that are new and then dispose of them, because it's ultimately going to cause us more harm than good. So to make some rags, you can cut up some old towels. I mean, you probably have a few that are like at the bottom of the pile in your linen closet that you never use because they're kind of yucky. Just cut them up into a few pieces and put them in your kitchen where your paper towels are. Put them in your bathrooms. That's where I use them. Who else uses rags here? Oh, geez, I should have asked you first. I'm preaching to the choir here. So, and I will have a special treat at the end for those few of you who don't have a collection of rags. All right, plastic bag bans have been all the rage, as we all know. We, Westwood Environmental Action, actually considered doing it last year as well. And at the time, I was doing a deep dive into this whole presentation, and I decided that, paper bags are every bit as destructive as plastic bags. In fact, from an upstream perspective, they're even more so. So I would say we don't want to get stuck holding the paper bag. And which do you think costs more upstream energy to make? Now, I'm not talking about ocean pollution. I know that's a problem. But this is a 100% recycled paper bag. And this is a plastic bag. Which one do you think took more energy to make and transport? Correct. In fact, even the 100% recycled paper bag required more energy to make and transport than the plastic bag. So So what we can do, in fact, we just did the Bring Your Own Bag Month. The hardest thing is to get in the habit of getting these bags back into your car and bringing them back into the store with you. And I don't always remember either, but I forced myself to go back, even if it's raining out, and get my bags. We did work with a number of retailers around Westwood, and they were very enthusiastic about trying to encourage people to bring their own bags. I just wish they'd put some signs right outside their stores that would remind people, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. Some bags even can fit in your pocket or purse. WEAC was giving out these little bags that unfold into a big t-shirt size bag. So you can stick it in your pocket, and if you find yourself at CVS and forgot your bag, you can just get it out of your pocket. So you gotta get yourselves one of these if you haven't got one already. I think we have a few extras which we'll be giving out. Westwood Day, Maria? We haven't decided yet. Okay, so we'll be making them available. So like rags and hankies, the bags do require occasional laundry because they do get kind of dirty. Now durable products do have a bigger footprint, so you do need to use them multiple times in order to cross this what we call the threshold. Since you have to put energy into making them, you have to use them several times, and it depends on what the material is. Plastic, like a polyethylene bag, like something like this, you probably need to use it about 10 times in order to have less of an impact than using 10 plastic bags. Cotton has a much higher embedded energy amount into it, so it is important not to let them get lost in your sock drawer, and you gotta bring them with you and use them. So who here remembers their own bags regularly? Oh gosh, I'm preaching to the choir again. You guys are great. All right, achieving zero waste is a big challenge. So I'm just going to sum up now. Only use what you need. Choose reusable products. And put your discards to their best use. I have a couple of handouts that I think most of you got on your way in. And these can be good references for you. On this page we have some checkpoints, which I think many of you can check some of these off already. But if you're looking for a way to reduce your footprint, you can try a couple of things a month and get in a new habit. So that's more than enough for you all to chew on by now. I hope I've been an inspiration to help you reach the ideal of zero waste. We can all learn new habits. I still haven't been able to part with my Sunday paper globe yet. That's my next habit that I'm going to be working on, trying to get myself used to the digital version. And I've been working on this for 30 years. So, as I mentioned, we have a list of new months resolution, I call them. And they're all easier to do than losing 10 pounds. And you can save hundreds of pounds worth of upstream pollution. And on the back is a guide to how to recycle right. Printed on both sides, I should note. 100% recycled paper. But it still took some energy to make it. Our biosphere has an amazing capacity to heal and regenerate. But if we keep taking and taking and taking it and not putting anything back, our little planet isn't going to be able to sustain us all. My 2-year-old that I talked about earlier in the presentation, she now has a baby of her own. That's Hazel in the globe there. She's my grandbaby. Isn't she adorable? She just started walking. But I'm sincerely concerned about the world that she's growing up in. I wonder what it's going to be like when she's 30 years old. And my dream is that by the time she is 30, using disposable products will be as socially unacceptable as smoking in a restaurant is today. Thank you very much. All right, so now that's the end of the talk. I've got some contact information, and we probably have a couple of questions, right? We got a few on these cards here. So why don't we take turns? I'll read a card and answer the question, and then we can take another question from an audience member that didn't write it down. Do you think that's Well, okay, we'll do all of these first. If I can read this. Mandatory ban on plastic bags. Is the state doing a mandatory ban on plastic bags this summer? I don't know. I did go to the hearing a month or two ago, and the committee seemed pretty interested in passing a bag ban, but you never know. I've been working with Beacon Hill for many, many years, and you just never know what's going to happen. A lot depends on what Speaker DeLeo is willing to let happen. Last session, they did get the bag ban out of committee, but they stripped out the fee on paper bags, and that did not pass. So whether he allows a fee to stay on the paper bags will be an interesting thing. I doubt if it'll happen this summer. Usually the legislation gets passed at the very end of the session. Everything happens in the last 3 weeks, which will be a year from now. So cross fingers that it will come through intact. Thank you for that question. We never did our quiz. Don't crush cans and bottles. All right, let's see. No. I mean, you can squish them a little bit, but don't flatten them, because if you remember, let's see if I can find it. So this is a nice three-dimensional bottle, but it does take up a lot of room. So that's still pretty much three-dimensional, so that's a good amount to squish it. Leave the bottle cap on, because if you don't, then the bottle cap will probably fall through the cracks and end up with the glass. So that is recyclable. And let me see if I can find, okay, here's a really flat tin can, a beer can that I picked up off the side of the road. So yeah, this is gonna end up in the paper, most likely. So what I do is I try to roll it up so it's sort of three-dimensional. I throw it in. All right. And I had a flat plastic container in here too. Here's one too. This is more than 2 inches, so this will be good to go. This will be a good plastic container. Pardon?
Is that a metal cap?
It's a metal cap. Oh, good point. Yes. I personally take off the metal caps. I think they can deal with those.
You can separate stuff like that.
I'm not 100% sure, though they're not really set up for the metal. So we keep a separate scrap metal can in our kitchen and bring it up to the DPW every now and then. So that's not a big problem either way. Let's see. Milk jugs allowed per waste management. Some of the you're talking about the cartons, I assume. Whoever answered that, right?
Yes.
They were allowed just because they kind of got pressured because everyone else was doing it. And what was happening was, these have the plastic coating on them. The only way to get the plastic coating off is to bale them separately and send them to a special plant in North Carolina, which can pull the plastic off. Waste management doesn't do that. They don't have the capacity or the capability to do that. So it was a small enough amount that the end users weren't complaining about it, but it's actually a contaminant. And the same is true for freezer containers. Anything that has to hold liquid has plastic embedded in it. So it all has to go in the trash.
Well, a lot of mail has coatings on it, plastic coating.
Which?
A lot of ads, whatever.
No, you mean like magazines and catalogs?
Yeah, a lot of cover sheet type stuff.
That's not plastic. That's like a clay sort of thing that makes it shiny. Oops. That goes in this one. Back to the cartons. Yeah? Yes?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
New topic.
Claire, there was a,
Ian.
Hold.
oh, sorry, about the milk cartons. There was an event at the Dedham Library a week or two ago, and I don't remember what our recycling company is. I don't think it's Waste Management, but I'm not sure. And the man that was talking to us said specifically that it's okay to put those milk bottles in. I had stopped doing it when I realized you couldn't.
This is a big problem. Well, I trust that the answer is no because, as I said, Mass DEP convened the major material recovery facilities and they decided that that was on the off list for now. If they develop the technology or the capability to do a separate bales and send them down, then they will be able to take the cartons. But for now, I recommend trying to buy your liquids in recyclable plastic. And it is a problem. The confusion is massive. Even within the recycling community, we had a huge argument about, greasy pizza boxes. It was hilarious. See, I think we've got a couple more. Rigid plastic 1, 2, and 5. Info from DPW Waste Management. Okay, Waste Management will say 1 through 7, just to make it simple. And the majority of plastic is 1, 2, and 5. I know that they can't sell the number 6, which is polystyrene right now. Let's see, polystyrene. Speaking of polystyrene, where did it go? Okay. There it is. I found my flat plastic. So where does this go? Yep. All right, polystyrene. Why couldn't we roll it up? That's a good point. I don't think it'll stay. You can unflatten it. Yeah, that won't stay put. Plastic has a memory, so it tends to go back to the way it was. So don't buy plastic water bottles. All right, polystyrene. Okay, rigid plastic containers. Is this rigid? No. Just imagine what happens to this when it goes through all those squashes and beatings. The little pieces of styrofoam end up stuck to everything. So styrofoam, it's a very efficient material. It's mostly air. There's really not a lot to it, but it has to go in the trash. So we didn't talk about cups. Water to wash rags. Excellent question. Is the water to wash the rags equivalent to the amount to make paper towels? It is a wash. The amount of water that you use to wash a rag, somebody actually did this experiment, is about the same as the amount of water it takes to make a paper towel. But you don't need all the energy and chemicals that went into making the paper towels and transporting them. So, excellent question. Before Westwood went to single stream, we had a transfer station with separate bins for copper, bronze, steel, aluminum, colored glass, clear glass, paper, corrugated, and similar cardboard. Are we really better off now? Excellent question. The answer is yes and no. We are only better off because it's more convenient, so we capture more of the material, but we are not better off because the material is lower quality. So we have sacrificed quality for quantity. And I work for 15 towns. Half of them have drop-offs, transfer stations, which have source separated, and half of them do the single stream curbside. And the ones that do the drop-off with the source separation are vastly better off right now with the markets the way they are. And their products that are coming out of their facilities are way cleaner. So no, I don't think we're really better off now. We're probably capturing a little more material, but it's harder to sort it out. Let's see. How do they separate different types? Polystyrene, polyethylene, PET, PVC. They use optical sorters. So they have a scanner, and I don't know the details of this, but they have spectral. Each type of plastic has a different signature. It's a chemical signature, something about the way the wavelengths go off. Jan could explain it better than me. But when they identify a plastic resin type that they're looking for, it shoots a jet of air and it blows it off. So that's the short story of how they do that. Different types of plastics have different chemical and physical properties. Let's see. I have not done a good job keeping track. Can Waste Management provide stickers for our recycle bins that list the no-no items? Sure they can, will they? I've tried. No, they do send a mailer out every year, and we should read them carefully. This card, for now, tape this to your recycle card, and this should give you at least the basic information. Or the back of this one. Okay. Are hardcover books recyclable? The insides of the books are recyclable, the covers are not. There are book collections. There's a company called Discover Books, and there's another nonprofit called More Than Words. So they do have collection bins, not in Westwood, but around. So if you Google either Discover Books or More Than Words, they should have a bin locator. You can also donate books to the library. Generally, they don't want encyclopedias, though. Textbooks are kind of iffy. So to recycle them, you have to cut the binding off, the hardcover binding, and then you can recycle it with the paper. What about recycling TVs, computers, and phones? In Westwood, we have recycling day twice a year, and that's when you can bring it down. Nina?
Best Buy takes all that stuff.
Yes, thank you. Best Buy does take all that stuff. Not TVs. You have to pay for the TVs. But the other kind of materials they'll take at no charge. Staples also takes computers back. If you go to my website, ssrcoop.info, and I don't know if I have this on any of the materials. Oh yeah, it's on here. Recycling A to Z is a page, and there's a whole page on electronics. So, and all textiles, fire extinguishers. It's geared towards the South Shore, but it might be helpful for things like that.
There was no question here at the top. The orange.
It was crossed out. Where can I get a metal straw? I don't know. I think the bamboo straws are probably more sustainable.
Are you done with that?
All right, so I'm done with the cards. So now we're ready to take questions. More questions. Hey, Martha.
The dozens of orange pill bottles.
Orange pill. Thank you for asking that. Yes. Okay. That's in my bag of tricks that I somehow managed to not get to. Orange pill bottles and nip bottles. Okay, these are too small. They're less. This is less than 2 inches, so it will go through the cracks. However, the pill bottles. Let's see, what is this? I can't even read it. I think. Oh, polyethylene. Yeah. The little nip bottles, unfortunately, have to go in the trash. Not the side of the road, please. I pick up a bunch of them. Pill bottles and bottle caps are number 5 plastic, and Whole Foods collects number 5 plastic. This is kind of an interesting thing. It's a great question. There are, what's this?
I think they stopped.
They changed, we thought they did too, but they still do it. They changed the arrangement. So look for the number 5 plastic bin. They take Brita filters. That's really kind of what it's set up for. Stonyfield yogurt container, or any kind of yogurt container. And a company in Waltham actually takes this number 5 plastics and they turn it into not silverware, but forks and knives and plates and cutting boards and toothbrushes. It's called Preserve, and they sell it at Whole Foods also. So there's your number 5 question. But don't put it in your recycling cart because it will end up falling through the cracks. Cups.
I know, but you want to get to them on camera.
Okay, I'll just repeat it. We have a question about cups, which I did want to cover. Cups are a container, yes. Some of them are this one's number 6. So the caveat for plastic cups is if it's clear, they can deal with it. And if these go in you know, it's not as big of a problem as a plastic bag, but generally try not to buy things that are not 1, 2, or 5. If they're number 6, throw them away. Now here we have a Burger King cup that I picked it up off the side of the road. Some of you might have seen me up vlogging, you know, it's jogging and picking up litter. It's all the rage in Sweden. So these cups hold water, so they're embedded with plastic. So they cannot go in the recycling. They also usually come with a straw and a lid. So is it rigid? Is it plastic? Yes. Is it a container? No. Same with this. Rigid? Yes. Container? No. Nope. Nope. Those go in the trash. All right.
Yes, thank you. This has been really informative. I appreciate your effort in teaching us this. I just have a question about, I'm sure a lot of the people in this room are very responsible and doing a lot of the things that you suggest, but I went to a restaurant today and every single thing in the restaurant was plastic or styrofoam. 40 years ago I lived in Germany and none of the grocery stores gave any bags, nothing. People brought collapsible crates and that was in the early 80s. So I just wonder, I appreciate that people are responsible, but I wonder how we can make corporations, our government, more responsible so that this issue really has a really strong effect, besides what people in this room do or what people in Westwood do, or trying to get the state legislature to do something. I mean, this is a world crisis, and I appreciate that people are doing things in this room, but I think it has to go on a broader scale.
It absolutely does, and thank you very much for that. We've gotten into some very bad habits, and a lot of it is because companies want to sell us more stuff, more and more and more.
But
Yeah.
just to make a comment though, I also went to some restaurants recently in Wellesley and actually down at the grill. We went last night at the grill, and they both provided compostable cardboard for their materials. So there are certain companies that are considerate. I'm wearing pants from Patagonia, which is of course expensive, but these pants are made out of completely from plastic bottles. So you can do that.
Good to know. Thank you.
I would like to say something. Someone tonight said, oh, I'm not interested in the League of Women Voters, I'm just interested in recycling. And I would like to say that in order to change things, we have to change laws. And we have a full-time committee working at our state level that is working on these issues. So no matter what it is you care about in your life, whether it's recycling, water quality, air quality, that's what the League of Women Voters does. And we're hopefully going to be celebrating our 100-year birthday this next year. So come join us. You know, there are no have-tos in our organization, but we have a lot of things that are very educational, as you will see from this evening. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Marcia. And I do a lot of legislative work also in my job, and it's very, very hard to get anything done at the state or federal level, especially if it involves money and a way that large companies are making money. I'd like to drop the expression extended producer responsibility. This is something I've been working on for a long time. The bottle bill is kind of an example of it, where the manufacturers have some responsibility for taking back and managing their disposable waste. And we're working now, well, we have filed right now a packaging and paper producer responsibility bill in the State House. I don't think it's probably got much chance of going too far, but if enough people start demanding it and accepting that we need to take some responsibility for giving up some of our conveniences, because it's going to really require that we're going to need to remember to bring our own containers into the restaurant. I've been trying to do that for a couple of years and I still can't remember. I have to go back out to my car. Bring your travel mugs, you know. The reason that retailers are loath to not to charge for things or to not provide them is because they want to make the customers happy. And that is really their primary concern. So they will really need to be required by law to have to hold back on things or change the way they do things. And it needs to be done thoughtfully. I mean, if we're just going to swap out one problem for another, like paper for plastic, that really isn't a win. So these things have to be done with great thought too, not just because something seems like it's terrible, you know? But yeah, absolutely. We all need to be thinking about contacting our legislators, joining the league, joining other organizations, and because we have to change our culture. Nina, I know Nina had a question, and I want Jan to make sure that Nina gets hers.
And we're gonna come back.
And we'll come back, yes.
Just a very simple question. The foil on a wine bottle, is that recyclable? And the heavy plastic bags that soil comes in, can I put that?
No. Those soil plastic bags are embedded with like nylon, so they're multi-material. Anything that's different, like different types of materials stuck together, they really can't recover that. It is a very efficient material though. And the first thing was the foil. No, they don't really want that foil, but they can deal with it. I mean, it'll end up in the glass and it'll get screened out. Glass is a problem in general though. The only bottling plant that existed in the whole region is now closed. It used to be in Milford. That's where our glass used to go. Now our glass is being ground up and stuck under the road base. So it's not really recycling. It's better than throwing it in the trash. But, you know, glass is a very inefficient material. And I used to think, oh, I don't want my ketchup in plastic. I want it in glass. But then glass is another really energy-intensive material to manufacture and to use to transport. So, a little confession, we drink our wine out of the box now. And it's actually pretty good. We're not big connoisseurs, but you can recycle the box. You can't recycle the little plastic container, but it keeps it fresh longer, so there's less waste that way. So life cycle analysis, it's better. Yes.
Hi. I have a couple of questions around paper. One was, I saw that you can't recycle shredded paper, and I'm wondering, is it better to add that to compost or throw it away? And then the other question is there an easy way to stop junk mail?
Oh God, junk mail. Yeah. All right, shredded paper first. No, I'm glad you asked that because that was part of my little pony show here. No, these are little tiny shreds that are just going to stick to everything, especially if they get wet. So they just make a mess. Yes, compost or animal bedding is a better way to deal with it. Or bring it to the bank. You know, sometimes the banks have shredding days, and since that all goes into one container and doesn't get mixed up with stuff, that does get recycled. So look for the bank shredding days. And this is gonna go in the trash here, but if I was at home, I'd put it in my compost bin. Dan.
More of a comment, but if anybody wants to comment on my comment, you're welcome. I'm all for going after the government, but as a professor of government once told the class, the government is always the last to change. It's
Yes.
always last. The people always change first. And if anyone wants to take the challenge, I haven't met it either, but I have a brother-in-law who lives in Germany, and he and his wife have a house and a garden and a car, and they recycle a lot of stuff, but every week he puts out his trash. However, his trash, the couple, they're about my age, fit all their trash into a standard American lunch bag per week.
That's impressive. So it is possible. and that called to mind another thing I was going to talk about, smoking. When I was in college, I used to smoke. The cook at the restaurant I worked at smoked right over the grill. I remember people smoking in supermarkets, and nobody smokes. You know, my kids, 10 years later, my kids walking down Boylston Street in Boston saw somebody smoking on the sidewalk, and they were horrified. So it is possible to change our culture if we have the will to do it. So, but that's what it's going to take.
Yes, is there any place to recycle CDs and DVDs? I know Best Buy used to take them, I don't believe they do anymore.
I'm not sure about that. There is a place you can mail them back to, and they might charge you a fee. If you go to that ssrcoop.info, Recycling A to Z, click on media. I'm pretty sure there's a place there, Green Disc, I think. And I can't guarantee that they're still doing it, but yeah, I've got a lot of those things too. I used to take them to Best Buy. So thank you for not putting it in the recycling cart. Bam!
I was in Maine last weekend, and they have a plastic bag ban, and they charge 5 cents for every paper bag you take.
Good.
And I didn't see any decrease in the amount of shoppers in the store.
Really? Oh, yeah, we're gonna have to wrap up soon. Now, did you notice that people were bringing their own bags, or were they taking the paper bags for a nickel?
I think some of them were taking paper bags
Yeah.
for a nickel, but I'm sure over time that'll change.
I hope so. I hope so. Boston's got a 5-cent fee too, and the state bill has a 10-cent fee, which I hope it sticks.
I hate to tell you, but we will be thrown out of here in 15 minutes. So if you need to ask Claire some more questions, you may do so. If you want to come to our annual meeting next week, please check on your sign-in sheet, and I'll send you an email with directions. But I think we all owe Claire a big round of applause.
Thank you all so much for coming. I always enjoy talking about that, so it was really my pleasure.